More tit-for-tat moves between China and the West. Beijing's restrictions on the exports of drones and related equipment begins today.
Beijing has cited concerns that easily accessible commercial drones are being used for military purposes, particularly by Russia and Ukraine. Teresa Tang takes stock of how it impacts wars of both the geopolitical and the military kind.
Drones. These unmanned aerial devices are fast becoming the weapon of choice in modern-day warfare. Case in point, Russia's war in Ukraine. In May, official data showed Moscow deployed a record 300 drones to Ukraine in just 1 month. Kyiv isn't so far behind with its own army of drones, born out of a simple crowdsourcing campaign last year. Reports suggest both sides rely largely on Chinese commercial drones, easily bought online for around $2,000 or less. But now, China's having none of it. Exports of Chinese long-range civilian drones have been restricted after the West accused the country of aiding Russia's war efforts. Beijing said it's concerned that the same drones used by hobbyists and enthusiasts are now being used to destroy, strike, and kill. But analysts say there's more to the measure than meets the eye. You see, the drone restrictions were announced on the same day China's limits on gallium and germanium took effect. They opened another round in an ongoing tech tit-for-tat with the West. And now, observers believe Chinese drones have become the latest weapon in Beijing's trade war arsenal. Chinese drone maker DJI sells them like hotcakes, holding more than 70% of the global market share. U.S. lawmakers have said that more than 5 in 10 drones sold in the country are made by DJI. The company says it has never made or sold drones for military purposes. It remains to be seen how these new curbs could impact sectors that are unrelated to the military. But analysts say it could potentially disrupt sales to segments that rely on drones for data gathering, such as agriculture and public safety.
And for more, we're joined by Dr. Joshua Schwartz, Assistant Professor of International Relations at Carnegie Mellon University. Dr. Schwartz, drones had been increasingly used in military operations prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But is it fair to say that the conflict has accelerated their usage and expanded their scope? Even commercial use and hobbyist-type drones have been weaponized.
I think that that's absolutely safe to say. Both Russia and Ukraine have been using commercial drones, especially Chinese-made DJI drones in the conflict. And so you certainly have seen in this war a significant expansion of the use of both military drones, but also commercial drones for military purposes.
Well, Dr. Schwartz, those moves by China, is it seen as a setback for Ukraine in the war? The aerial vehicles have been employed by both armed forces. And so now, how would it change how the war is fought?
Yeah, so I think it depends on how the policy is actually implemented by China. If these new export restrictions apply evenly, then that could make it harder for both sides to use Chinese drones in the war. However, I think even in this case, the impact would likely be limited because drones will continue to be provided by other countries like the United States and Iran. But on the other hand, it's possible China could play favorites and covertly supply Russia with drones. And if that was the case, then these restrictions might actually end up giving Russia an advantage. And so I really think the policy's impact is going to depend on how it's actually implemented.
And could you just elaborate to us how these sort of commercial drones are used for military purposes then?
Sure. So they're used in several different ways. So one simple way is you could attach a grenade to a normal civilian drone and have that drone either drop the grenade or ram into a target. So that's one possibility. You could also use commercial drones for surveillance. So you can target your artillery fire or other types of fire. So there's many different ways from surveillance to direct strikes that these commercial drones could actually be used for military purposes.
Now, we know that Chinese drone maker DJI holds more than 70% of the global market share. While that's a commercial company, the Pentagon recently announced its own replicator program to innovate the use of drones in warfare. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the United States government sees this as a relatively cost-effective way in order to combat its adversaries. Of course, they won't necessarily be militarizing commercial drones. They'll be developing their own military drones. But I think this is just another example of the increasing use of drones in warfare.
Well, those restrictions are reportedly effective for no longer than 2 years. So, how significant of an impact would it have on the global drone market? We know China is a big player. And in the meantime, are there any countries or any other manufacturers of drones that could take its place?
That's a fantastic question. So the Chinese Commerce Ministry has self-described these new export restrictions as, quote, a moderate expansion of their existing controls. And so I don't think we should necessarily view this policy as a major paradigm shift, especially because, as you mentioned, it's only a temporary policy. And there certainly are other, manufacturers of civilian drones that could fill this void to some extent, and that actors that want to use commercial drones for military purposes could turn towards in order to achieve their objectives. And besides just the commercial drone market, we're continuing to see the proliferation and spread of armed military drones around the world. And in fact, China has actually been the major driver of the spread of armed drones around the world. Of every country in the world, they're the country that have actually sold the most armed drones to other states.
So is it possible then to separate out dual-use technology when it comes to trade and security? It seems like it will only get harder as the US and China compete for resources and the continued push into AI, both commercial and military uses.
It's extremely difficult to do so. You can do your best to try and make sure that the companies that are purchasing these technologies have a clear use for these technologies that are commercial rather than military in nature, and you can try and put in restrictions based on that. But it's very difficult to control the use of these commercial drones once they're on the market. Even, in the United States, commercial drones are widely available. You can go on Amazon and have a commercial drone delivered to you within a day or two and potentially weaponize that. So I do think this is a difficult problem, but I do think that China's policy is a step in the right direction.
Well, the move is also seen as the latest in the ongoing tech tit for tat between China and the US. How does this play into the ongoing trade war? And could, export bans on more materials or defense technology follow? And if so, what could they be?
Sure. So it's certainly possible that this new policy is retaliation for recent U.S. actions against China, such as new restrictions against technology investments. Though the Chinese government does claim that these measures do not, quote, target any specific countries, though, again, it's going to remain to be seen how this policy is actually implemented. Is it implemented in a way that's designed to hurt the United States, or is it implemented in a more even manner? And it is a fact that around 50% of the commercial drones sold in the United States are from the Chinese company DJI. And so it's certainly possible that this new policy could potentially impact those sales. And I think it's also interesting that China announced these new export restrictions the week after the US government accused Chinese state-owned military contractors of shipping over $12 million worth of drones to Russia, possibly for use in the war against Ukraine. So it's possible these new restrictions are also a response to the US report in order to reiterate China's at least alleged policy of neutrality in the Russia-Ukraine war.
Final question before we go. We know this restrictions is only for about 2 years, but still, do you think there will be any effects on sectors that rely on China-made drones, data gathering, public safety, even agriculture?
I do think there will be impacts. They'll likely be disruptive to those industries, but I don't think it will prevent them from acquiring the technologies they need. It's important to remember that this new policy entails restrictions, but not a complete ban on the sale of commercial drones. Exporters can still apply for a license to sell these more sensitive drones if they provide additional details about how the drones will be used. But still, companies will certainly now face greater red tape and costs if they want to acquire drones that fall under this new policy.
And Dr. Schwartz, we'll leave it there for now, but thank you for your time this morning. Dr. Joshua Schwartz, Assistant Professor of International Relations at Carnegie Mellon University.